The coffee in President Richard's cup had gone cold 3 hours ago, but he kept holding it anyway. Outside his office window, the lights of New Washington sparkled in the evening darkness, each one representing millions of people who had no idea. Their world was about to change forever. The red phone on his desk buzzed once, then twice. He knew what that meant. "Sir, they're here," came the voice of General Mills through the secure line. "Long-range sensors picked them up 30 minutes ago. 12 ships, unlike anything we've ever seen. They're not responding to our hail attempts." Richard set down his coffee cup and walked to the window. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds and atmosphere, alien ships were approaching Earth. After 2 centuries of searching the stars and finding nothing but empty worlds, humanity was no longer alone. The question was whether that would be a blessing or a curse. Blake Torres had been mining asteroids for 15 years, but he'd never seen anything like the ship that appeared on his scanners. The vessel was massive, easily 10 times larger than Earth's biggest carrier, and it seemed to bend light around itself like heat waves rising from hot pavement. His mining ship, the Lucky Strike, was just finishing a routine collection run near Jupiter when the alien fleet passed by. "Control, this is Torres. You seeing this?" he whispered into his comm unit, afraid that speaking too loud might somehow draw attention to his small ship. "We see it, Blake. Stay quiet and keep recording. You're our only eyes out there right now." The alien ships moved with impossible grace, their hulls shimmering with colors that had no names. Torres counted 12 of them, arranged in a perfect diamond formation as they glided toward Earth. He'd read every science fiction book ever written, dreamed of this moment since he was a kid, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. These weren't the friendly explorers from the movies. There was something cold about the way they moved, something that made his skin crawl. Maya Okafor was working late in her office at Colonial Administration when the emergency alert came through. As Director of Human Expansion, she oversaw 17 colonies across 12 star systems. It was her job to make sure humanity's children among the stars had everything they needed to survive and grow. Tonight, that job was about to become much more complicated. The video feed from Earth's orbital defense platforms showed the alien fleet taking position around the planet. They hadn't fired a shot, hadn't made any aggressive moves, but their presence alone was a clear message. Maya had spent years studying potential first contact scenarios, but all the planning in the world couldn't prepare her for the reality of it. Her assistant rushed into the office, face pale with worry. "Director, they're broadcasting something. Universal translation protocols are working. They want to talk." Maya nodded and activated her communications array. Whatever these aliens wanted, humanity would face it together. That was how humans had always survived, by standing united against threats from the darkness. The alien who appeared on Earth's screens was unlike anything humans had imagined. Admiral Thane belonged to a species called the Hydros, beings that looked like they had evolved in the depths of some vast ocean. His skin was pale blue and seemed to ripple like water, while his eyes were large and completely black. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that came from commanding fleets across the galaxy. "People of the third planet," Thane began, his words translated into every human language simultaneously. "I am Admiral Thane of the Galactic Dominion. Your species has violated the Stellar Accords by establishing colonies in protected space without permission from the galactic community." President Richards felt his blood run cold. Protected space, galactic community. Humanity had been exploring and colonizing for over a century, and they'd never encountered any signs of alien civilization. How were they supposed to follow rules they didn't know existed? "You will withdraw from all colonized worlds immediately," Thane continued. "Your species will confine itself to this solar system until such time as the Dominion Council determines whether you are capable of responsible expansion. You have one standard cycle to comply. The transmission ended, leaving Earth's leaders in stunned silence. Then the questions began flooding in. How long was a standard cycle? What exactly were the stellar accords? What would happen if humanity refused? Those questions were answered an hour later when the alien fleet demonstrated their power. Earth's orbital defense platforms, massive structures that had taken decades to build, simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged, just turned off like someone had flipped a switch. The message was clear. The aliens could disable Earth's defenses any time they wanted. Blake Torres watched from his mining ship as the demonstration unfolded. The defense platforms went dark one by one, their weapon systems and shield generators failing without explanation. Whatever technology the aliens possessed, it was far beyond anything humanity had developed. Control. How are they doing that? Torres asked, though he suspected no one had an answer. We don't know, Blake. Our engineers are looking at the data, but it's like the platforms are just forgetting how to work. Whatever these aliens are using, it's not in any of our textbooks. Maya Okafor stared at the reports flooding her desk. 17 colonies, millions of people, decades of work and sacrifice. The aliens wanted humanity to abandon it all and retreat to Earth, like frightened children. Every instinct told her that compliance would be the smart choice. These beings had technology that made humanity look like cavemen throwing rocks at jets. But Maya also knew her people. Humans had crossed frozen wastelands to reach new continents. They'd sailed across vast oceans, not knowing what lay beyond the horizon. They'd launched themselves into space on controlled explosions, trusting mathematics and courage to carry them to distant worlds. Humanity didn't retreat. It was against their nature. President Richards called an emergency session of the World Council. Representatives from every nation and colony gathered in the Great Hall, their faces grim but determined. The debate lasted for hours, voices raised in anger and fear, but gradually a consensus emerged. We didn't crawl out of caves and cross oceans to bow to tyrants among the stars, Richards said as he prepared to broadcast humanity's response. If they want Earth's children to kneel, they'll have to break our backs first. The message went out on all frequencies, transmitted to every human settlement across 12 star systems. Humanity had made its choice. They would not surrender their colonies, would not accept confinement to one small corner of the galaxy. If the aliens wanted a fight, they would get one. Admiral Thane received the human response with something that might have been disappointment. He had hoped these creatures would show wisdom, would recognize the futility of resisting the Dominion. Instead, they chose defiance. Very well. The Dominion had dealt with rebellious species before. None had lasted long against the combined might of 12 civilizations. As Earth's response echoed across the galaxy, both sides began preparing for war. Humanity faced impossible odds, but they had something the aliens didn't expect, the stubborn refusal to give up that had carried their species from caves to stars. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you cornered the human race. The alarm had been screaming for 20 minutes, but Diana Webb barely heard it anymore. Through the command bunker's reinforced windows, she could see New Geneva Colony burning. What had been humanity's proudest achievement in the Centauri system was now a collection of glass craters and twisted metal. The Dominion fleet hung in the sky like metal vultures, their energy weapons turning city blocks into molten slag with each pulse. Colonel, we've lost contact with sectors 7 through 12, reported her communications officer, a young man whose voice cracked with barely controlled panic. Civilian evacuation shuttles are taking heavy fire. Half the spaceport is gone. Diana gripped her rifle tighter and watched another beam lance down from orbit. Where it touched, matter simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just nothing. The aliens weren't just killing humans, they were erasing them from existence. 6 months had passed since Earth's defiant response, and this was the Dominion's answer. Not negotiation, not diplomacy, just systematic extermination. Order all. Remaining civilians to the underground shelters, Diana commanded. And prep the fusion charges. If we're going down, we're taking this whole colony with us. 3-star systems away, Tom Bradley was doing exactly that. The mining foreman had spent 15 years turning the asteroid belt around Kepler 442 into humanity's industrial backbone. Giant processing stations carved precious metals from space rocks, while automated factories turned raw materials into everything the colonies needed. It had taken a generation to build, but Tom was going to destroy it all in a single day. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his assistant, staring at the detonation sequence Tom had programmed. "That's 20 billion credits worth of equipment." Tom's laugh was bitter as he watched Dominion ships approaching on the long-range sensors. "Credits don't matter if we're all dead, kid. Better we blow it up than let them have it. Start the evacuation. Every ship, every shuttle, everyone out. Leave nothing they can use." The explosions began an hour later. Processing stations the size of cities vanished in nuclear fire. Asteroid. Mines collapsed as their support structures were severed. Fuel depots erupted in chains of destruction that lit up space like a string of suns. When the Dominion fleet arrived, they found only debris and radiation where humanity's greatest industrial achievement had once thrived. Amanda Foster had been working for 36 hours straight, but she couldn't afford to sleep. Not when every minute might bring humanity closer to survival or extinction. The captured alien technology lay spread across her laboratory tables like the pieces of some impossible puzzle, fragments of hull metal that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Computer components that processed information using quantum effects she barely understood. "Doctor, we're getting somewhere with the weapon fragments," called her research partner from across the lab. "The phase shift effect isn't magic. It's manipulating subatomic particle states to alter matter interaction probabilities." Amanda rubbed her tired eyes and tried to focus. After 6 months of studying Dominion technology, she was starting to understand how it worked. Their weapons didn't just shoot energy beams, they convinced matter to forget how to be solid. But if humans could understand the process, maybe they could reverse it. "Keep working on it," she said. "If we can figure out how they punch through our shields, maybe we can figure out how to punch through theirs." Harrison Mills had been a logistics officer before the war, the kind of man who made sure soldiers had ammunition and medical supplies, had fresh bandages. Now he was overseeing the transformation of human civilization into a war machine that would have impressed his ancestors. The Phoenix Protocol was his brainchild. Convert everything, use everything, waste nothing, mining ships. Became missile platforms, their drilling equipment replaced with torpedo tubes. Cargo haulers turned into carriers, their holds filled with fighter craft instead of trade goods. Even luxury passenger liners found new purpose as hospital ships and troop transports. If it could fly and carry weapons, the human military wanted it. "Sir, the conversion is ahead of schedule," reported his aide. "We've got 17,000 civilian vessels armed and ready for combat. Not pretty, but they'll fight." Mills nodded as he reviewed the production reports. Asteroid mining operations that once extracted metals for construction now focused on materials for explosives. Agricultural worlds began producing chemical compounds for weapon systems instead of food exports. Every human settlement had become a fortress. Every civilian a potential soldier. The changes went deeper than just weapons and ships. Humanity itself was evolving, adapting to the reality of total war with a speed that would have terrified their enemies if they'd understood it. Children learned mathematics by calculating missile trajectories. Engineers designed better armor during their lunch breaks. Doctors developed new treatments for energy weapon burns between surgeries. Admiral Thane reviewed the tactical reports with growing concern. The humans should have surrendered by now. Every military doctrine in Dominion History said that inferior species collapsed within months when faced with overwhelming force. Instead, these creatures were fighting harder than ever. "Admiral, the humans have destroyed another supply depot," reported his tactical officer. "That's the 7th one this month. Our forces are having difficulty maintaining their offensive due to resource shortages." Thane's tentacles writhed with frustration. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were denying resources to the Dominion by destroying everything they couldn't hold. It was a strategy that made no economic sense, sacrificing valuable assets, rather than allowing them to be captured. But it was also devastatingly effective. The first human counterattack came 8 months into the war. Lisa Hayes had been a cargo pilot before the fighting started, running supplies between the outer colonies. Now she commanded a converted freighter loaded with humanity's newest weapons, quantum-tunneling missiles that could phase through Dominion. Shields, just like alien energy beams, phase through human armor. "Target acquired," she reported to her gunner. "Dominion heavy cruiser, 200,000 kilometers in closing. Let's see how they like getting a taste of their own medicine." The missiles launched silently in the vacuum of space, their quantum guidance systems locked onto the alien ship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Dominion cruiser's shields flickered and died as the warheads passed through them like they weren't there. The explosions that followed lit up space like a newborn star. "Direct hit!" Hayes shouted over the comm system. "Shields are down! Hull breaches on multiple levels! She's breaking apart!" It was humanity's first major victory against Dominion forces, and the news spread through human space like wildfire. The aliens could be hurt, they could be killed. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, humans believed they might actually win. Back on Earth, President Richards addressed the nation with tears in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride. His people had faced annihilation and refused to break. They'd taken the worst the galaxy could throw at them and somehow found a way to fight back. "My fellow humans," he said, his voice carrying across 12 star systems. "Today, we proved something important. We proved that no matter how advanced our enemies think they are, no matter how hopeless things might seem, humanity will never surrender. We came from caves and reached for stars. Now the stars are shooting back, but we're still reaching." The war was about to enter a new phase, one where both sides would discover just how far they were willing to go to survive. The galaxy had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since their ancestors first picked up tools and decided to fight back against a world that wanted them dead. The Dominion thought they were dealing with another primitive species that would collapse under pressure. Instead, they'd stirred up something ancient and terrible, the human capacity to adapt, evolve, and escalate beyond all reason when faced with extinction. The real war was just beginning. Rodriguez Santos had always been afraid of dying alone, but as he strapped himself into the pilot seat of his fighter craft, he realized he was about to die with 10,000 friends. The Proxima Station battle had been raging for 3 days, and humanity was losing badly. Dominion forces surrounded the massive space station that served as the hub for human military operations in the outer systems. "This is Santos to all Widowmaker units," he spoke into his comm system, his voice steady despite the fear eating at his stomach. "Remember, speed is everything. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and make sure they remember us. The Widowmaker Protocol." Was humanity's latest answer to superior alien technology. If you couldn't outfight them, out-crazy them. Human pilots would accelerate their small fighters to nearly light speed and ram them directly into Dominion ships. The kinetic energy would tear through any armor, shields be damned. It was suicide, but it worked. Lisa Hayes watched from the command deck of her converted carrier as 40 human fighters began their final acceleration run. Each pilot had volunteered, knowing they would never see home again. She'd tried to talk them out of it, tried to find another way, but deep down she knew this was what separated humans from every other species in the galaxy. The willingness to embrace certain death, if it meant taking enemies with them. Widowmaker 1. Beginning. Final approach, came Santos's voice over the comm. Tell my wife I love her and tell my kids their dad was a pilot till the end. The fighter disappeared into a streak of light as it struck the lead Dominion ship. The alien vessel, larger than a city block, cracked in half like an eggshell. 39 more impacts followed in rapid succession, turning the Dominion fleet into expanding clouds of debris. But the victory came at a terrible price. Proxima Station itself was caught in the destruction, its 10,000 civilian inhabitants vaporized along with the enemy. Michael Porter had been a teacher before the HFY War, the kind of man who helped children learn to read and discover the wonders of science. Now he was carrying a briefcase full of biological weapons toward a Dominion base on Kepler 438b. The virus inside had been designed by Amanda Foster's team specifically to target alien immune systems, and early tests showed it was devastatingly effective. Remember, full environmental suits at all times, Porter reminded his infiltration team as they approached the base. This stuff doesn't care if you're human or alien. It'll kill anything with DNA. The base was one of the Dominion's forward supply centers, housing over 50,000 alien personnel from multiple species. Porter's mission was simple: get inside, release the virus, and extract before it spread. The plan worked perfectly, until they saw the results. The aliens didn't just die. They suffered. The virus attacked their nervous systems first, causing paralysis and excruciating pain before finally shutting down vital organs. Porter watched through his helmet cameras as proud alien warriors crawled across the ground, begging for death, in languages he couldn't understand. By the time his team extracted, the entire base was a tomb filled with the agonized corpses of beings who had been alive and healthy just hours before. "My God," whispered one of Porter's teammates as they reached their extraction point. "What have we become?" Porter didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. They'd become whatever they needed to become to survive, but the cost was starting to feel higher than anyone had imagined. The Dominion's response was swift and merciless. Patricia Nash had been governor of Armstrong Colony for 8 years, watching it grow from a rough mining outpost to a thriving community of 2 million people. She was in her office reviewing agricultural reports when the sensors detected incoming ships. Not invasion ships this time, but something far worse. "Governor, we're reading massive energy signatures from the approaching fleet," her military advisor reported, his face pale with recognition. "Those look like antimatter deployment vessels. They're not here to invade. They're here to sterilize." Patricia felt her heart stop. Antimatter weapons were the ultimate expression of Dominion. Power capable of turning entire planets into expanding spheres of pure energy. The aliens had decided that if they couldn't control humanity, they would simply erase them from existence. "How long do we have?" she asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. 20 minutes until they reach optimal firing position. Not enough time to evacuate anyone." Patricia nodded and activated the colony's emergency broadcast system. If these were going to be her people's final moments, she wanted them to face death with dignity. Across the planet, families gathered in their homes, lovers held each other close, and children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. "This is Governor Nash to all residents of Armstrong Colony," she began, her voice carrying to every home, every workplace, every school on the planet. "We've received word that our world is about to be attacked with antimatter weapons. There's no escape, no shelter that can protect us. In a few minutes, everything we've built here will be gone." She paused, looking out her window at the city she'd helped create. Streets lined with trees brought from Earth. Parks where children played games their grandparents had invented on distant worlds. All of it about to become nothing. "But I want you to remember something," she continued. "We came here as explorers, as dreamers, as people who refused to be satisfied with one small world. We've lived free under alien suns, raised our children among the stars, and touched the infinite. That's more than most species ever accomplish. Remember us." Make them pay. The white fire came 20 minutes later, just as predicted. Armstrong Colony and its 2 million inhabitants were transformed into pure energy in the space of a heartbeat. The planet itself cracked apart, its molten core exposed to space before it too was consumed. Where a world had once orbited its star, only expanding plasma remained. Admiral Thane watched the destruction from his flagship and felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: doubt. The humans should have been terrified by this demonstration of power. Instead, their attacks became more vicious, more desperate, more insane. They were using biological weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They were ramming ships into his fleets like guided meteors. They were fighting like cornered animals instead of rational beings. Admiral, we're receiving reports from the Hydro's homeworld, his communications officer announced. Human forces have somehow triggered solar flares that are bombarding our agricultural centers. Billions of our people are dead. Thane's tentacles went rigid with shock. How had humans reached the Hydro's home system? How had they learned to weaponize stellar phenomena? This war was spiraling beyond all expectations, turning into something that threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. David Park had been an astrophysicist before becoming a field marshal, and his deep understanding of stellar mechanics made him the perfect person to lead humanity's glass campaign. The strategy was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. If the Dominion wanted to destroy human worlds, humanity would return the favor by destroying Dominion suns. Initiate Sequence 7, Park ordered from his command ship as they approached the Hydro's system's star. Target the chromosphere with gravitational pulse generators. Let's give these aliens a taste of their own medicine. The weapons were based on captured Dominion technology, massive devices that could manipulate gravitational fields from a distance. When properly applied, they could destabilize a star's magnetic field and trigger massive solar flares. The Hydros had evolved on water worlds orbited close to their sun, making them particularly vulnerable to stellar radiation. The flares began 6 hours after the gravitational pulse. Streams of superheated plasma erupted from the star's surface, washing over the Hydro's homeworld and its 3 colony planets. The ocean world's atmosphere was stripped away in minutes, its vast seas boiling off into space. Floating cities that had existed for millennia were vaporized instantly. Park watched the destruction through his ship's telescopes and tried to feel something other than grim satisfaction. These beings had started a war of extermination against humanity. Now they were learning what extinction felt like. Robert Kim's reality bombs were the next escalation in humanity's increasingly desperate arsenal. The weapons didn't just destroy matter, they erased it from existence by collapsing local space-time. The first test at Wolf 359 had created a permanent void where an entire star system once existed, a sphere of absolute nothingness that light couldn't cross. Dr. Kim, are you certain about the containment field calculations? Asked his assistant as they prepared the second-generation bomb for deployment against a Dominion stronghold. If this destabilizes local space-time beyond our projections, then we'll have created a wound in reality that might never heal, Kim finished. But if we don't use it, the Dominion will exterminate our species. I'd rather risk breaking the universe than guarantee human extinction. The bomb detonated at the edge of the Dominion's military headquarters system, creating a growing sphere of nothingness that consumed everything it touched. Planets, ships, the star itself, all of it simply ceased to exist as space-time collapsed in on itself. The effect stabilized after consuming roughly half the system, leaving behind a permanent scar in the fabric of reality. Anne Murphy had been treating soldiers for psychological trauma since the war began, but the cases she was seeing now were beyond anything in her medical training. Men and women who had witnessed too much death, caused too much destruction, were returning from battles as empty shells. They could still fight, still follow orders, but something essentially human had been burned out of them. Tell me about the last battle, she said to a Marine who had participated in the biological attack on the Christek homeworld. The soldier stared at her with dead eyes. We deployed the spore bombs at dawn. By evening, their forest cities were toxic wastelands. Millions dead, maybe billions. I watched children trying to breathe air that was eating their lungs from the inside. How does that make you feel? Murphy asked, knowing the question was probably pointless. Nothing, the soldier replied. I don't feel anything anymore. That's the only way to keep fighting. Murphy made notes in her file and scheduled the soldier for extended therapy. But she knew it wouldn't help. How could anyone maintain their humanity while fighting a war this brutal? Both sides were committing atrocities that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago, and the psychological cost was destroying the very people they were trying to save. The Dominion was fracturing under the pressure of total war. 3 member species had withdrawn their fleets rather than continue, fighting an enemy that seemed to become more dangerous with every defeat. The remaining alien governments were questioning whether the human threat justified the galaxy-wide destruction both sides were causing. But Admiral Thane had passed the point of rational decision-making. His homeworld was dead. His fleet was reduced to a fraction of its original strength, and these impossible humans continued to find new ways to kill his people. If negotiation was impossible and victory seemed unlikely, there was only one option left: complete annihilation. Protocol Zero had been created as the Dominion's ultimate weapon, designed to end wars by making entire star systems uninhabitable. The device could destabilize stellar cores, turning any sun into a supernova that would sterilize everything within 50 light-years. It had never been used, considered too dangerous even by the Dominion standards. But desperate times called for desperate measures. If humanity wouldn't surrender, they would die with their birth world. Earth itself would burn, taking the human species into extinction. The device was already en route to the Sol system, hidden within a supply convoy that human forces would never suspect. The war was about to reach its final terrible conclusion. The stars themselves were dying, and Rebecca Martinez had a front-row seat to watch the galaxy burn. As Earth's chief stellar engineer, she monitored solar activity across human space, tracking the health of the suns that warmed humanity's colonies. What she was seeing now would have been impossible to believe 5 years ago. Deliberate stellar murder on a scale that beggared comprehension. Another Dominion agricultural system just went nova, reported her assistant, pulling up the sensor data from the edge of known space. That's the 15th star this month. The gravitational pulse. Weapons are getting more efficient. Rebecca studied the readings and felt sick. Each of those stars had supported billions of lives, entire civilizations that had existed for millennia before humans ever left Earth. Now they were expanding clouds of superheated gas, their planets, reduced to cosmic dust. The Glass Campaign had been humanity's answer to Dominion extermination tactics, but the price was starting to feel higher than victory itself. Field Marshal Park's strategy was working too well. His teams had perfected the art of stellar assassination, turning the Dominion's own suns into weapons against them. Agricultural worlds that had fed entire species were now radioactive wasteland. Industrial centers that had produced goods for galactic trade were buried under metric tons of irradiated debris. Sir, we've received surrender offers from 6 more Dominion member species, Park's intelligence officer reported during their daily briefing. The Verdani, the Silicates, and 4 others want to withdraw from the war completely. Park nodded grimly as he reviewed the casualty reports. The Verdani forest worlds had been particularly vulnerable to human bioweapons, their interconnected root systems spreading toxins across entire continents in days. The proud silicate hive minds had suffered complete network collapse when human hackers introduced chaos algorithms into their shared consciousness. Tell them withdrawal isn't enough, Park decided. If they want to survive, they need to actively turn against the Dominion. We're past the point where neutrality means safety. The psychological warfare was working. Species that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years were abandoning the alliance rather than face human retribution. But Park knew it might not matter. Intelligence reports suggested Admiral Thane was preparing something called Protocol Zero, and every simulation suggested it was aimed at Earth itself. Dr. Foster's laboratory had become a house of horrors that would have impressed the most creative demons. Her latest project involved quantum viruses that could rewrite genetic codes from a distance, turning entire populations into something that was no longer quite alive, but not entirely dead either. The test subjects had been Dominion prisoners of war, and the results were beyond disturbing. "The quantum conversion is stable," reported her research partner, studying the writhing mass that had once been a proud Christek warrior. "Neural activity persists, but higher brain functions are completely scrambled. They retain motor skills and basic survival instincts, but personality and memory are gone." Foster watched the thing that had been an enemy soldier trying to communicate with sounds that bore no resemblance to language. The weapon was designed to be deployed on enemy worlds, creating populations of mindless drones that would consume resources without contributing to the war effort. It was efficient, cruel, and completely effective. "Begin mass production," she ordered, hating herself with each word. "We'll need enough to cover at least 12 Dominion worlds if they don't surrender within the month." The moral weight of her work was crushing, but Foster had learned to carry it. Every weapon she created brought humanity one step closer to survival. If that meant turning alien children into mindless monsters, she would do it and find a way to live with the consequences later. Admiral Thane's flagship drifted through the debris field that had once been his species' greatest military shipyard. The Hydros had built vessels here for over 10,000 years, perfecting the art of space warfare through countless generations. Now it was nothing but twisted metal and cooling plasma, another casualty of humanity's inexplicable ability to turn defense into offense. "Admiral, the Protocol Zero device has reached the Sol system," his tactical officer reported. "Stellar destabilization can begin at your command." Thane stared at the tactical display showing Earth's solar system. Such a small, unremarkable collection of worlds to have caused so much destruction. The humans had started this war with primitive chemical rockets and basic fusion weapons. Now they were casually erasing star systems from existence with technology they'd reverse-engineered from captured Dominion equipment. "How many of our species remain?" he asked his aide. "Approximately 2 billion across 7 colony worlds. The homeworld population is gone. 2 billion from an original population of over 1 trillion. The humans had achieved in 5 years what natural disasters couldn't accomplish in millions. They had driven an ancient species to the brink of extinction through sheer bloody-minded determination. "Initiate Protocol Zero," Thane commanded. "If we must die, let us ensure these monsters die with us." The stellar destabilizer was a device the size of a small moon, hidden within what appeared to be a standard supply convoy approaching Earth's sun. Human sensors would detect it as routine cargo traffic until it was far too late to stop the process. Once activated, Sewell would begin a chain reaction that would turn it into a supernova within hours. Back on Earth, President Richards was receiving the most disturbing intelligence briefing of his presidency. Agent Wilson had infiltrated a Dominion intelligence network and discovered Protocol Zero just hours before its implementation. The device was already in the solar system, already beginning its deadly work on the sun that had warmed Earth for 4 billion years. "How long do we have?" Richards asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. 18 hours until the chain reaction becomes irreversible," Wilson replied. "After that, nothing can stop it. Sol will go supernova and sterilize everything within 50 light years." Richards felt the weight of 8 billion human lives pressing down on his shoulders. There was no time for evacuation, no possibility of escape. Earth's entire population would die screaming as their sun expanded to engulf their world. But if Protocol Zero succeeded, it would take most of humanity's colonies with it. The human species would be reduced to scattered outposts on the galaxy's edge. What about Project Pandora? Richards asked, grasping for any possible solution. Dr. Foster's voice came over the secure communication link. We've been working on stellar manipulation devices based on captured Dominion technology. If we can identify their homeworld star, we might be able to trigger a simultaneous supernova. Mutual assured destruction. It was insane, suicidal, and exactly the kind of plan that had kept humanity alive for the past 5 years. If Earth was going to die, they would drag the Dominion down with them. The galaxy would learn that attacking humanity came with a price. That might not be worth paying. The race began immediately. Human intelligence networks activated across Dominion space, searching for any clues about Admiral Thane's location and the position of remaining Dominion command centers. Meanwhile, Foster's teams worked frantically to prepare their own stellar destabilizer for deployment. Marcus Webb commanded the human strike force that would deliver the counterweapon. His grandmother Diana had died defending New Geneva Colony at the war's beginning, and he'd been fighting the Dominion ever since. The mission was simple in concept, but impossible in execution. Penetrate Dominion defenses, identify their command, structure, and deploy a star-killer weapon before Earth's sun exploded. Remember, we're not coming back from this one, Webb told his crew as their stealth ship approached what intelligence suggested was Admiral Thane's headquarters system. But if we do this right, we'll take every one of these alien bastards with us. The Dominion fleet defending their command system was massive, but it was also spread thin after years of losses to human attacks. Webb's ship used every stealth technology humanity had developed, slipping between patrol routes like a ghost in the darkness. The Star-Killer device in their cargo hold was based on the same principles as the weapon threatening Earth, but it had been modified with human improvements that would make the stellar collapse even more violent. "Sir, we've identified the target star," reported Webb's navigator. "Long-range scans confirm massive fleet concentrations around the fourth planet. That has to be where Thane is hiding." Webb studied the tactical display and made his decision. They had one shot at this. One chance to ensure humanity's extinction came with a price the galaxy would never forget. The stellar destabilizer launched from their ship like a metal comet, using gravitational slingshots to build velocity as it raced toward the system's sun. On Earth, the first signs of solar instability were becoming visible. The sun's surface was developing dark spots that pulsed with unnatural rhythms, and solar flares were becoming more frequent and intense. Space-based observatories detected the quantum cascade that would eventually trigger the supernova, but there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. "Estimated time to stellar collapse, 14 hours, announced the emergency broadcast system. "All citizens are advised to spend time with loved ones and prepare for evacuation to underground shelters." The shelters wouldn't help, of course. When Sol went supernova, the entire inner solar system would be vaporized instantly. But it gave people something to do, some illusion of action in the face of absolute helplessness. President Richards stood on the balcony of his office, watching. The sun set over New Washington one last time. Tomorrow there would be no sunset, no sunrise, no Earth, just an expanding sphere of superheated gas where humanity's birth world used to be. But if Webb's mission succeeded, the Dominion would join them in death. "Sir, we've got confirmation. From the strike team," his aide announced. "The Star-Killer device has been deployed successfully. Admiral Thane's star will go supernova approximately 6 hours after ours does." Richards nodded and poured himself a drink. Humanity had always been good at spite, at making sure their enemies paid for every victory. If this was how their species ended, at least they would end it on their own terms. In the Dominion command system, Admiral Thane received similar news. His sensors had detected the human weapon approaching their star, and his scientists confirmed it would trigger the same cascade reaction that was destroying Sol. The humans had managed to turn certain defeat into mutual annihilation. "How did they do it?" he asked his science officer, genuine curiosity mixing with grudging respect. How did a species that barely mastered spaceflight 5 years ago develop stellar weapons? They learned from us, Admiral. Every weapon we used against them, they studied and improved. Every tactic we employed, they adapted and turned back against us. They've been using our own technology to destroy us from the beginning. Thane's tentacles writhed with something that might have been admiration. These humans were monsters, but they were magnificent monsters. In 5 years, they had evolved from primitive explorers into the galaxy's most dangerous predators. If circumstances had been different, he might have enjoyed studying their remarkable adaptability. Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth, his communications officer announced. It's President Richards. He wants to talk. The human leader appeared on Thane's view screen, looking older and more tired than when the war began. But his eyes still held the fire that had driven his species to the stars, the stubborn refusal to surrender that had made them such terrifying enemies. Admiral Thane, Richards began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I suppose we should talk, since we're both about to die. Indeed, Thane replied, feeling oddly pleased to finally speak with the human who had caused him so much trouble. Your species has proven most resilient. I confess I underestimated your capacity for violence. Richards laughed, a sound with no humor in it. We tried to be explorers, Admiral. We wanted to reach the stars and find friends among them. You turned us into something else. And what is that? The thing you're most afraid of. The monster that refuses to die quietly, that drags its killers down into darkness. You wanted to exterminate humanity, and in the process, you created the perfect exterminators. Both leaders fell silent, watching their respective suns beginning the final stages of collapse. Across 2 star systems, billions of beings prepared for death while their leaders shared what might be the last conversation either species would ever have. Tell me something, Admiral, Richards said eventually. Was it worth it? All this destruction, all these dead worlds? Was enforcing your galactic order worth burning half the galaxy? Thane considered the question seriously. His species was extinct. Most of his allies were dead or had abandoned the Dominion, and entire star systems had been reduced to radioactive waste. The galactic civilization that had existed for millennia was in ruins, and the survivors would spend generations recovering from the devastation. No, he admitted finally. It was not worth it. We should have tried to understand your species. Instead of trying to control it, perhaps we could have found another way. Maybe, Richards agreed. But I suppose we'll never know now. The transmission ended as both stars entered their final death spirals. Within hours, 2 more star systems would join the growing collection of voids that marked where civilizations once thrived. The war between humanity and the Dominion was reaching its end, but the galaxy would bear the scars for generations to come. On Earth, families gathered to watch their final sunset. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer, while lovers held each other close and tried to memorize every detail of faces they would never see again. It was the end of humanity's birth world, but it was also the culmination of everything that made their species remarkable. The refusal to go gently into extinction, the determination to make their deaths mean something. The stars were about to learn the final lesson humanity had to teach, that some prey, when cornered, becomes more dangerous than any predator. The evacuation ships fleeing Earth looked like metal tears falling away from humanity's dying birth world. Captain Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last transport struggle to reach minimum safe distance before Sol's final collapse. They would save perhaps 1 million people out of Earth's 8 billion, but it was better than nothing. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting Dominion fleet movements, his tactical officer reported. Looks like they're making one last push toward the inner system. Torres smiled grimly. Even facing mutual annihilation, both sides couldn't resist one final battle. The approaching Dominion fleet was probably Admiral Thane's remaining forces, racing to witness humanity's destruction before their own star killed them. It was fitting, in a way. The war that had consumed the galaxy would end where it began, with humans and aliens shooting at each other while the universe burned around. Them. All ships prepare for engagement, Torres ordered. If we're going to die today, let's make it memorable. The space battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Ships from both fleets fought with desperate fury, knowing they were already dead but determined to take enemies with them. Human vessels cobbled together from mining equipment, and civilian transports threw themselves at Dominion warships with suicidal abandon. Alien forces, veterans of 1,000 campaigns, fought with the precision that came from millennia of military tradition. Sarah Mitchell piloted her fighter. Through the chaos, her instruments screaming warnings about radiation levels and structural damage. The UES Retribution had been her home for 3 years, a converted cargo hauler that somehow kept flying despite being held together with spare parts and determination. But the ship was dying, leaking atmosphere and losing power with each hit. From Dominion weapons. "This is Mitchell to all units," she broadcast over the general comm channel. "My ship's finished, but I've got one more trick to play. Tell my family I died flying." She aimed the Retribution directly at the Dominion flagship, a massive vessel that dwarfed her dying ship like a whale next to a minnow. The collision would barely scratch its armor, but sometimes the gesture mattered more than the result. Her ship struck the alien vessel's hull at 3% light speed, creating a brief new star as matter converted to energy. Admiral Thane felt his flagship shudder under the impact and allowed himself a moment of respect for the human pilot who had just died to damage his ship. These creatures never stopped fighting, never accepted defeat, never showed mercy to themselves or their enemies. In another time, under different circumstances, he might have admired such determination. "Admiral, stellar collapse has reached the point of no return," his science officer announced. "Both stars will go supernova within the next 6 hours. Thane nodded and turned his attention to the tactical display. His fleet was being torn apart by human forces that should have been easy to defeat. Cargo ships were ramming his cruisers, mining vessels were deploying improvised nuclear weapons, and civilian transports were somehow launching fighter craft that struck with the precision of military pilots. But the battle was irrelevant now. Win or lose, everyone in both systems would be dead before the day ended. The only question was whether they would die fighting or die running. On the surface of Earth, those too old or sick to evacuate gathered in parks and on rooftops to watch the sky burn. The sun had developed visible instabilities, dark spots that pulsed with unnatural light, while solar flares reached out like grasping fingers. The planet's magnetic field was fluctuating wildly, causing aurora displays at latitudes where they had never been seen. Dr. Foster stood in her laboratory, surrounded by weapons that would never be used and research that would never be completed. She'd spent 5 years creating increasingly horrible tools of destruction, each one designed to inflict maximum suffering on alien enemies. Now it all seemed pointless. The war was ending not with victory or defeat, but with mutual extinction. "Doctor, we're receiving reports that the Pandora device has reached target," her assistant announced. "The Dominion command star is beginning its collapse sequence." Foster felt no satisfaction at the news. They'd succeeded in their mission to drag the aliens down with them, but it was a hollow victory. Both civilizations would be remembered only as cautionary tales about the dangers of total war. She walked to her laboratory window and looked up at the increasingly unstable sun. Somewhere out there, human colonists on distant worlds were probably celebrating the news that Earth had managed to kill Admiral Thane and his forces. They didn't understand that victory and defeat had lost all meaning. The galaxy itself was the real loser, scarred by weapons that turned star systems into expanding clouds of plasma. President Richards spent his final hours in the White House, garden, sitting on a bench his wife had loved during their brief marriage decades ago. She'd died in the first Dominion attack on Luna Colony, vaporized along with 50,000 other civilians who'd been in the wrong place when the war began. "Sir, the final evacuation shuttles have cleared Earth's gravity well," his aide reported over the secure comm system. "The Ark ships are beginning their journey to the outer colonies." "Good," Richards replied, though he wondered what kind of civilization those survivors would build among the stars. The humans fleeing Earth were hardened by 5 years of total war, shaped by experiences that would have driven their ancestors insane. They would carry the scars of this conflict to whatever worlds they settled, and their children would inherit nightmares along with the stars. The Ark ships themselves represented everything humanity had learned about survival. Each vessel carried not just refugees but complete industrial systems, genetic banks, cultural archives, and weapon blueprints. The scattered colonies that received these survivors would become fortress worlds, prepared for wars that might not come for generations, but would certainly come eventually. Marcus Webb died with his hand on the detonation trigger, his ship broken and bleeding atmosphere as Dominion fighters swarmed around it. But the stellar destabilizer was already in position, already beginning the quantum cascade that would turn Admiral Thane's star into a weapon of mutual destruction. "This is for New Geneva," he whispered into his comm system, though no one was left alive to hear him. "This is for Armstrong Colony. This is for everyone who died because you couldn't leave us alone." The device activated 6 hours before Sol's collapse, ensuring the Dominion would have time to understand what was happening before their own extinction arrived. Webb wanted them to experience the same helpless terror that humanity had felt watching their worlds burn. Both stars died within minutes of each other, their deaths visible across half the galaxy as twin supernovas erupted simultaneously. The expanding shock waves would sterilize dozens of systems, ensuring the war's consequences would be felt for generations, even by species that had never participated in the conflict. The survivors of both civilizations watched their homeworlds burn from the safety of distant colonies. Human refugees on the Ark ships stared at view screens showing Earth's final moments, while scattered Dominion remnants witnessed the destruction of their species' birth world. Both groups faced uncertain futures on hostile worlds, carrying the genetic and cultural memories of civilizations that had chosen mutual annihilation over surrender. 50 years later, Marcus Webb's grandson opened the first official archives, documenting the Human Dominion War. The younger Marcus had been born on a colony world settled by Earth refugees, raised on stories of the homeworld his family had lost and the aliens who had taken it from them. The historical records made for grim reading. Conservative estimates put the death toll at over 2 trillion sentient beings across both sides. 47 star systems had been completely sterilized, their suns turned into expanding spheres of plasma that would prevent new life from evolving for millions of years. The galactic civilization that had existed for millennia was gone, replaced by scattered colonies that viewed any contact with alien species as a potential existential threat. "Tell me about the war," a young student asked during one of Marcus's lectures at New Geneva University, built on a world named for his grandmother's lost colony. Marcus considered the question carefully. How could he explain the transformation of his species from peaceful explorers to galactic exterminators? How could he describe the escalation that had turned a territorial dispute into mutual genocide? "We reached for the stars with open hands," he said finally, repeating the words that had become humanity's unofficial motto. When the stars struck back, those hands became fists that broke the galaxy itself. The student pressed for more details, but Marcus found himself reluctant to elaborate. The specifics of stellar weapons and biological warfare seemed less important than the broader lesson that some conflicts have no winners, only survivors carrying scars that never heal. In the decades that followed, both human and surviving alien colonies developed cultures centered around remembrance and preparation. Children learned the names of lost worlds alongside basic mathematics. Engineers designed defensive systems during their lunch breaks. Medical schools taught courses on treating energy weapon injuries alongside traditional anatomy. The galaxy had learned that humanity could be pushed too far, but the lesson had come at a price that made the knowledge worthless. Half the star systems in known space were now radiation-soaked graveyards, their planets reduced to drifting asteroids and cooling gas clouds. Sometimes, late at night when the 3 moons of New Geneva rose over the university campus, Marcus would stand at his office window and look up at the stars. Each point of light might harbor descendants of civilizations that had once threatened humanity, or it might be completely empty, sterilized by weapons his grandparents had deployed in desperation. The galaxy was a much quieter place now, its surviving inhabitants having learned that some species were too dangerous to awaken. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through diplomacy or trade, but through their demonstrated willingness to burn the universe rather than accept extinction. The war was over, but its echoes would reverberate across the cosmos for generations. Somewhere among those distant stars, other species were probably evolving, developing technology, reaching towards space with the same dreams that had once driven humanity from Earth. Marcus hoped they would be wiser than their predecessors. The galaxy could not survive another war like the one that had scarred it so deeply. But he also knew that hope might not be enough, and that the weapons his people had developed would be waiting in archives and armories, ready to be used again if some new threat emerged from the darkness between stars. The price of victory had been everything humanity had once been. The price of survival might be everything they could still become.